Welcome back. Let's take a look at our Kanban board and see what we can move over to done. So we got this mood selection UI. It's in doing. Let me see if we've completed everything. So we've built a mood slider. We have the heading, the slider. We can save a mood. They can see the 5 moods. Select moods visually highlighted. Yep. Okay. So this is all done. We can move that over to done. Display mood history. Okay, so we're still working on this. And the very next thing to do here is to get our view model together. Let's just give this a run and make sure we're all on board with where we are at this point. So we have our mood slider, we have our mood history. This isn't showing anything right now, it's just a UI. It needs to be hooked into the view model. And let's see if we can still print out. All right, great. We can still print out the saved moods, and let's work on getting that also hooked up to the mood history. To get the view model to work, I would like to use the same view model that the mood selection uses, because they're both going to interact with the Swift data container, and the logic is always going to be very similar. For both of these screens, we want to save moods and we want to fetch the mood on the mood history. So this is mostly just going to be a model that's going to allow us to interact with the Swift data container. And I don't want to sync those two things up in two separate view models. So I'm just going to use one view model for both of these screens. If this wasn't an MVP, I would think a little bit more about that, but it's the simplest way to move forward here. The first thing is a rename. So refactor, rename. Let's call it mood selection view model. That way we can reuse these things and it makes sense. We want the mood selection view model to, actually, let's just call this saved mood view model. That's a little bit more descriptive because it is really just a way to interact with the saved moods. It's either saving the mood or pulling the mood, so let's just call it a saved mood view model. All right, so we got the mood value, currently selected mood from the mood selection screen. We can update the mood value, and eventually we're gonna want a way to save the mood to Swift data, and we're gonna want to fetch the mood from Swift data. Right now, saving and fetching in the mood selection screen is happening within the UI, and that's really not what we want. So we definitely want to pull those things out. Going back to the mood selection screen, and I'm finding where we save the mood. So instead of doing this, we want to do, view model.selected mood. The reason why I don't want to just pass through the saved mood is because I think maybe saving later on the mood history screen, it will allow us a little bit more flexibility if we create this saved mood inside of the view model. So we're just going to pass in the data and allow it to make the struct that it needs to make for Swift data. And then we'll pass in a date. And here it's just going to be today's date. Okay, but now let's make this work. So now we got to create that function. We want to do that. And we passed in a mood, which is a mood, and a date, which is a date. And we're going to create that saved mood. And that's going to be the mood and date that we pass in. And now we're discovering that we need this context. We need to pull in this context somehow. I'm going to build just this here and just see where we might have some issues. I'm going to rename this again. So save mood, that should be fine. All right, so the build has succeeded. And now we want a way to fetch the mood. So func fetch. And where we're currently fetching in the mood selection screen, that's where we want to do this. So I'm actually just going to snip this out for now. And then we'll do ViewModel.fetch. And put this in here. So where did saved moods come from? Let's take a look at what exactly that was. So saved mood was a query into the context. So again, we're going to need that context. So we're going to comment all that out. I'm building just to make sure before moving on that at least the code compiles. So our very next step is to somehow pass in a context. And we know we're going to need Swift data, so let's import Swift data now. And we're going to pass in the context into the initializer, so let's create a private var. Well, it's not going to change, so I think it could be a private let. And I think this context is a model context. And then let's create that init. I'm going to create the init after all of these variables. And then our self.context is now context. And then hopefully we can use the context here. And then we'll think about fetching it a little bit. Right, now we can just use selected mood. Okay, that gives us a way to have to pass in the context. And this is the first issue that I've come across. So now that we are inside of the mood selection screen, we're trying to create this view model. We can't initialize it at this point because context is not available to this struct yet. It's only available once the view is actually running. So one way to do this is to have an onAppear, which sets the context for you, which means that once the view has appeared, now that you know you have access to the context, then you can inject it. And we're going to do just that, but we got to think about where we're going to do that. So we can do it right here. But like I said, I do want to reuse this view model. I don't want to I don't want to put this in multiple places. So what I'm going to do is just take this a step back. So instead of doing all this inside of the mood selection screen, I'm going to do it inside of the main view that we created. So let's take this view model, and instead of initializing it here, we're going to initialize it a step backwards. So instead of instantiating two view models, we're going to have one that we pass into the mood selection screen and we pass into the mood history screen. So this is going to be the view model, and we're going to do the same thing for the mood history screen. So we'll put that in there and we'll get some errors and then we can fix those. So here in the main view, that's where we want to start doing, start creating the view model. So we'll need the context again. And then we're going to need an @state private var view model. And I'll explain why that is in a second. All right, so we got this guy. And then on appear, we're going to add a new modifier here. We're going to set the view model and pass in the context, and we're going to build. And so this is showing you exactly what you need to fix. So for example, here in the preview, we're going to need some kind of saved mood view model. So this brings me to another point. I don't want to create a fake context each time that I want to use the view model. So I'm actually going to make the context optional. And by making the context optional, it allows me to not have to pass it in for things like previews. And that's just going to make my life a little bit easier and make the code a little bit cleaner. put that back there. Let's jump in here. And so let's make this context optional. And that would mean that this is going to be a var so that it can start out as nil. And then when we pass it in here, since it's optional, we can start it out as nil so that in the previews, this will have a default value of nil and we don't actually have to explicitly call this parameter. But that also means that on this line of code, we do need the question mark to say only if the context exists do we want to insert a saved mood. We'll build again and jump to the other problems here. So we'll let our ViewModel equals saved mood ViewModel, and now we can just call it this way. And then this needs a ViewModel, pass it in. We'll do the same thing here. All right, so we made the init private. Let's jump in and see what we can do. Got it. So this doesn't need to be private anymore. And we'll fix the ViewModel situation here as well. And these are just two ways you could do it. You could set it on its own line or just call it in here. It's fine. And then one more time. Okay, so I don't want to create a view model at this point. And the reason for that is that the context isn't available to us at this level. I went through a lot of debugging trying to figure this out the first time. And I didn't want to keep that video because I didn't want to ramble too much and I just wanted to get to the point and save you guys some time. But the @environment variable, if you use this, the environment variables aren't set up until the view is set up. So when I had this @environment here to pull the context and I was trying to pass it in on up here, it wasn't passing in the correct context because it just wasn't available at this point. And the funny thing is there is no compilation error that shows up. So if I had like view model, whatever, and pass in the context that it needed, I was taking a look at what the context was. If you set a breakpoint, and it's not nil, but it's not correct. So all that to say, don't try to create the view model at this point. Don't try to pull the context at this point if you're going to be using it to populate anything that you're going to use down the line. Like, yes, we want to create the container with this modifier. It works, but actually using the context with environment variables do not. Discard all that, and then let's jump into the mood selection screen. And then we're going to create an initializer. So I'm going to have an init here that's going to help us out with creating an initial view, creating an initial value for the view model. So this should be actually main view. And let's jump in here. Okay. Yeah, so we want to jump into the main view and actually create an initializer here. So we have this state property and we want to start it out with an initial value of some sort. Actually, I liked what it had there. Yeah, great. So what it's saying is use the view model. Let's just do self. Okay, so what this line of code is saying is take our view model and just initialize it with an initial value of an empty context, actually. But don't worry, that will get fixed once the view actually starts up, because right on appearing, it's going to replace that view model with another view model that has the context that we need. All right, so let's figure out fetching now so that we can test whether or not the insertion works. We'll need a way to fetch. And instead of using this @query, which isn't going to work inside of our view model, let's figure out another way to fetch from Swift data. So the way that we're going to do fetching now is by using a fetch descriptor. And it's going to look very similar to the insert. So we're going to do let saved moods equal context dot fetch, and then it needs a descriptor. So our fetch descriptor is going to be our saved mood. And let's build this, make sure I didn't make a syntax error. So we fixed some things here, so let's get rid of this. That was a mistake. And I think this just needs that. Cool. All right, so jumping back, this needs to be wrapped in a try because the call can throw. So this error is telling us that we need to mark this with the try. And if you mark it with a try, it's going to throw an error, which you need to catch. One way to handle this is by using a question mark, which means that if it does throw an error, don't worry, just return nil, it's fine. So then the saved moods would be nil, and that would make this optional. So we can do that, that's fine. But to make error handling a little bit better, what we can do is to get rid of the question mark and wrap this whole thing in a do catch, which would allow us to catch the errors and set breakpoints or even print it out, and it will bring our attention to what is causing this problem, if a problem does occur. So we'll wrap this in a do catch, and we'll just print the error. And you see if you build this, it succeeds. That's because there is like a behind the scenes labeling of this error here. So this error does come back in the catch, but you can also say like catch let e and then print e. It's the same as that. It's just a little shorthand for it. So if we get rid of the let e and just do error, it should be fine. This doesn't really call it out all that much just by printing, because as you can see, there are a lot of errors that print out to the console that you might not care about. So another thing I like to do as I'm coding is, if I do want to keep my eye out for errors on code that I'm actively writing, is to set a breakpoint. So now I know if an error does happen, not only is it going to print it out, but we also have it will stop the execution and show you exactly where the error is happening. We got the save moods. Now we just take this thing and stick it in there. And then Control I to align everything again. Sometimes I do Command I and then it starts it starts spinning up the profiler, which I never want. Build again. This is optional because context is optional, so we'll just do that. Build. And it succeeded. I'm in the middle of filming my ViewModel stuff. Oh, sorry. Okay, bye-bye. It's okay. Goodbye. Okay, so I'm looking at this and I'm like, I created this mood and I'm not even using it. Let's fix that. Okay, and that's the date and the mood that we need. Perfect. And to be honest, here when we use the mood, we pass in the ViewModel selected mood. We might want to change that later, but for now I'm going to leave it just in case we do need to pass in a mood when we do the mood history stuff. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. Let's run this and see if we can save and pull from core data, from Swift data. I'll save very pleasant, and I'm going to tap the circle, and I got the very pleasant and I got the neutral. Excellent. Okay. That's perfect. Now let's clean this up for the mood history view. And this is where we want to start actually using this view model. So what I'm thinking where we can start is just by making this text show the correct month. And to help us out, I'm just going to open up both the view model and the view, and I will close the canvas so that we can code side by side. So I'm thinking to go back, we need to update a date that's saved somewhere. And to go forward, it's the same. And then this is pulling from the date that we saved. So we're going to need some kind of property here that's going to be like the selected date. And so that also needs to be published so that the text can update as you change the date with these two buttons. So we're going to create an and everything is published if it's in observable macro. I got to get used to that. So I think that I can just do var selected date. And that's going to be a date. And I'm trying to think if I want this to be optional or if I want to start it out with just today's date. I think we can just start it out with today's date or the date at the time that this is created, and see how far we can get. So that means that we want to set the selected date here. ViewModel.selectedDate is something. And this header view needs access to this view model, so let's pass it down a step, and then that will need to be passed in here. That means, and so to set the selected date, it's going to look a little bit like this, which means we grab the current calendar and we're going to add a month. So we're going to take the current calendar and we're going to add some kind of value, and it's by month, right? But the value is -1, which means that it's going to go backwards a month. It's basically saying minus a month. And then we're going to do that to this date. So if you're on December, the selected date is going to say December. And so when you click this back arrow, then we're going to now set the date to the month previous. Hopefully this makes sense. And we're going to need the same code here to go forward. And instead of going back a month, we're going to go forward a month. So we're going to increase that month. And then the selected text is going to be the selected date, but we need to format it because the format's not exactly what we want to see, so we're going to format this. And so text has a parameter called format, and you can take a look at what it does here, but basically what I'm telling it is to use the type of format to see the entire month and the year. And you can take a look at anything you have access to by just jumping to the definition. So wide is going to say September, narrow S, and these are all of them here. Let's give this a run and see what this does. Cool. So we're able to go forward and backwards. Yeah, sweet. So let's think about what we want to do next. So if you notice, as you go forward and backwards in the months here, it's not updating the days in the calendar. And that's the very next thing we're going to work on is, yeah, we get the text here, but now we need to update the days of the month. So when we do set the selected date, we're probably going to want to update the days of the month. I'm not sure if I can do like a did set on selected date. That's another way to go about it. So instead of like everywhere in the code where you do set it to something else, you also update the days of the month. We could do something like did set and then do something here, update month days. Let's give this a try. And if this doesn't work, we'll go back to setting it everywhere. All right, so we need this function. We'll go down here and I'll put it up here. Update month day. Okay. And if it works for the jet set, then this can be private. We don't need to call it from the view. So we want the calendar. And so let's go over this code. We're going to close this for now and take a look at this. All right, so this is how I'm going to update the days of the month, basically. You take the user's current calendar, and then we're going to construct a new date, and that's going to be the start of the month for the selected date. And this is ignoring the time. It's just the month and the year, and it's constructing this new date object that is the 1st. So if you're in December, this is going to return December 1st, January 1st, whatever. And so this next line of code is going to give you the range of each of the days of the month. It kind of looks like what I was doing before with like the 1.31. This is going to return 1.29 for February leap year, and 1.28 for a non-leap year. It's just going to return you a range for each day of the month. And then this next line is iterating through each of those days, and it's just putting it into this month days array that we still have to create. And that way we can use that to create each of those cells in our grid, basically. So let's create this month days array thing. So that's going to be let month days, and that's going to be an array of dates. And let's build. Oh, it's a let. Oops, var. We're starting it out as empty because this is technically like a published property. Great. Now let's use those month days. Actually, before we start using it, let's see if this gets called when I expect it to. I'm going to set a breakpoint and just run it and see if it gets called. So I'm going to go forward. So I should be updating this guy. And yeah, it gets called. Great. Okay, cool. And I don't want to call it in there because it's looping. It's going to... Oh, geez. I'm just going to let it go. And I'll set it up here. Get rid of this. All right, let's try again. All right, gets called. And it doesn't get called again, which is what I expect. Now if I go back, it should get called. Excellent. Okay, cool. Let's actually use month days. So we're going to go down to where we have this range, and days of the month now is going to be ViewModel month days. And then this is going to be day of month. And we're going to do something with this. First, this needs access to the ViewModel. If I build this, yeah, I thought so. Okay, so let's grab this and put it down here. Build. ViewModel. And then, right, so now we're trying to get the text of an entire month, which is not possible unless we make it into a string somehow. We could do like whatever like description and just describe the date somehow. But let's think about this a little bit more. So we're going to need the day of the month for a couple of things. We're going to need it to access Swift data, right? Because so we're saving a bunch of objects that have a correlation between the mood and the date it was assigned to. For example, like yesterday for me is December 30th. If I said it was neutral, then if this day of month is December 30th, then I need to use that to find the mood that's associated to that date, right? And that's what's going to allow me to fill this with the color that's associated with a neutral mood. So somehow we have to correlate this back to mood. So we need something that says like let mood for day equals ViewModel dot mood for day. And we should be able to pass in the day of the month, and it should return us a mood inside of the ViewModel. And then we can use that to because moods have their selected color, we could do like mood for day dot selected color, and it's actually going to fill with the mood that we need. But also we need this day of month so that we can print out some description about the day of the month. And so this part, we probably don't need the view model for. We can just describe it ourselves using something like this. So what this does is takes a day, and then we're just getting the description for that date. And we'll see what that ends up looking like. All right, let's do this mood for day thing. I'm going to open it up side by side again. We're going to go to the view model, and we're going to create a new func, mood for day, and think about what we want this to look like. Well, it's basically a fetch, right? Like we're trying to fetch the mood for this particular day, but we only wanted to hand back the mood. So we can use this fetch function, and maybe we'll just pass in a parameter that's a specific day that we want. But I'm thinking about it a little more, and we don't want to keep accessing this database over and over and over again for each of these days. So why don't we just load it once at the beginning of initializing this view model and just access these moods in a dictionary or an array or something like that, some kind of data structure, so that we don't have to keep calling this fetch, which may be computationally intensive. We don't know. So we don't want to call this fetch, pull all the saved moods, and then just hand back the one that we need, and do that over and over and over again for all of these dates. Why not just call this fetch once, and then save it somewhere on this view model, and then just access an array, which is O of 1, if it's a dictionary, and that'll make this code a lot more performative. So let's do that. So we're going to call this fetch actually on init. We're going to get rid of this print statement here. And then the saved moods we want to save to some kind of data structure. And I'm definitely going to make it a dictionary so that it's the most performative it can be, which is O of 1 when we do the lookup. So we'll say var saved moods is a dictionary, and the keys are going to be the dates, and the values are going to be the moods. And now we just want to stick these saved moods in there. And yeah, this save moods, that save self.save moods, that's going to be confusing. So let's just call this fetched moods and then save moods, I guess. And we're going to create a dictionary. And what this parameter does, it just says that it's going to take the sequence and just make sure that each of the keys are unique, which they have to be for a dictionary. And so we're going to loop over the fetched moods with this map, and we're going to create keys from the dates and values from the moods. Now we can get rid of this. And then when we want the mood for the day, we can just access this public saved moods Or we can create like a helper function that will just clean up exactly when we call this. We can now have a mood for day, which just accesses this data structure, which we can make private. It's probably safer that way because we don't want this to be manipulated outside of the view model for whatever reason. So let's make this private. And let's just have a way for anybody to access the mood to a particular date. Okay, mood for date. It's just going to be save moods at the date. Yeah, that makes it a lot easier. Okay, so this, looking at all this makes me think of another issue, right? Like right now, we're able to save multiple times to the same exact date, right? Because like if I hit save right now, and I save neutral at 108, like we're saving the entire date with the time, and then we at 109 I could save a different mood and a different mood. We just want one mood per one day of the month, right? So how are we going to do that? I think we need to put some safeguards into when we actually save and say, hey, if a mood exists for this day of the month, then replace it. Otherwise, save a new one. But if it does exist, yeah, we need to be replacing the day for that date of the month and not just inserting a new one. One thing we have to do is to normalize the date, which means we need to have a way of not saving the time associated with the date that we're passing in here. One way to do this, the way that I want to do this, is to create an extension on date and just have some computed var or something that's going to normalize the date for us. And what that looks like is extension on date. I don't know if this is the best place to put extensions. Maybe I could do a new file for it. That would be the right thing, is to create a new file for this, but I'm just putting it in here, whatever. And then this is going to be normalized date, and it's going to return a date. So what are we going to do? And one way to do that is just to return the start of the date. That's the easiest way, that we can do, is basically it's going to return a 0 timestamp for the time of day. So now we can use this. Let's start with saving. Like I said, we have to first check whether or not there is an existing mood for that day. And actually, these would go together. So let's say if let existing date, if let existing mood is try context fetch descriptor save mood, and then we're going to do a first where the calendar dot current is date. So we're looping over all of these saved moods, and we're just saying, like, if there is a date that is the same as this normalized date that we're going to use here, then do one thing. All right, so $0.date, that's the current element in the iteration, is the same as the normalized date. So the normalized date is going to be date.normalized date, this date. So if there is an existing date, what do we want to do? Well, we want to say existing mood dot mood is equal to this new mood.